His boot stopped inches from her hands. The bread had fallen open on the dirt, torn paper flapping once before going still. Her fingers hovered like they might break if they touched anything. She looked up fast, eyes wide, face streaked with grime and fear. "Don't touch me." He stayed still. "I ain't touching you." She swallowed and glared at his legs. "Then stop standing like that." He shifted back a step, slow. She didn't move. The bread stayed between them. He waited. She watched the badge on his chest like it could bite her. "Eat," he said. She shook her head. "You gonna take it back?" "No, you lying." "No, everybody lies." He crouched, knees popping, voice low. "I don't lie." She sniffed. "Everybody says that." Wind pushed dust across the road. Somewhere metal clanged. She grabbed the bread suddenly and tore into it, chewing too fast, crumbs falling down her shirt. He didn't stop her. He didn't smile either. She ate like it might disappear. An engine hummed far off. She froze mid-bite. Her whole body went tight. "Don't let them see me." He turned his head, scanning the road. "Who?" She didn't answer. She dropped the bread and lunged forward, clutching his coat sleeve with both hands. Her grip was desperate, small fingers digging in. "Please." He looked down at her hands, then back toward the sound. "You gotta let go." "No, kid." "No." The engine faded. She sagged against him, breathing hard. He knelt fully now, so they were close. He could smell dirt and sweat and old smoke. "What's your name?" She shook her head. "You hungry?" She nodded, eyes flicking to the road again. "You got family?" She shrugged, then shook her head harder. "You the kind that lies?" she asked. He felt the question hit somewhere old. "No, you promise?" "Yes." She stared at him, searching his face like she was looking for cracks. She picked up the bread again, slower this time. "You gonna tell someone?" "No, you sure?" "I'm sure." She took another bite. Her hands were shaking. He noticed a scar on her wrist, thin and pale. "They come back?" he asked. She swallowed. "Sometimes." "Who's they?" She looked at his badge again. Her mouth pressed into a line. "The kind with keys." He didn't push. He heard his own breathing, steady and wrong. He felt something open behind his ribs. The engine sound came again, closer this time, then passed without slowing. She flinched anyway. He shifted so his body blocked the road. "You can finish it," he said. She nodded and ate the rest, crumbs sticking to her lips. When it was gone, she wiped her mouth on her sleeve. She looked smaller without the bread. "You cold?" He shrugged out of his jacket halfway. She stepped closer, hands still clutching him. "You gonna leave me?" "No, they always leave." "I won't." She leaned in, forehead touching his chest. He stiffened, then stayed. Her voice dropped to a whisper, broken and sudden. "Papa?" He froze, shoulder tightening as if her word had struck him. "I ain't," he started, but she clutched his coat sleeve tighter, fingers digging in. "Please don't make me say it loud," she whispered, voice small, desperate. He stared down at her, at the fear and hope tangled in her eyes, at the way she seemed older than she was and younger at the same time. "Who told you that word?" he asked, voice low. "You smell like him," she said without hesitation. He frowned. "That ain't an answer." She blinked, a rapid flinch, then let go slightly, still holding just enough to anchor herself. Her eyes never left the badge pinned to his chest, silver and dull in the fading light. He stepped back a fraction. She followed immediately, feet light and quiet on the dirt. "Don't," he said. "I won't," she replied, quick and anxious. Silence stretched a heartbeat, then she spoke again, fragments spilling out. "They took the others." "Who's they?" he asked, kneeling slightly so his voice wouldn't sound harsh. The ones with keys, she whispered, almost a confession. He swallowed, felt the old weight returning behind his ribs, the memory of loss pressing through. He reached for the radio at his belt, thumb hesitating, then pressed the button. Unit 5, status, he stopped mid-sentence. The static hissed in his ear. He turned it off and let it hang between them. She shifted closer, resting her head against his side, small and tentative, like she'd done it before, like she belonged there without asking. He felt a tremor he didn't recognize, a tension he hadn't known he carried. "All right," he said quietly, finally. "I hear you." Her small shoulders sagged as she pressed in closer. He didn't pull away. The sound of the wind through the trees felt different now, softer but heavier, carrying a sense of caution and anticipation. Her hair smelled faintly of dust and smoke. "Are you gonna leave?" she asked, voice almost a whisper. "No," he replied. She tilted her head against him, eyes closed, breathing slowing. A distant crow called, and he realized he had forgotten to scan the road again. "Did they hurt you?" he asked. She shook her head slightly, too weak for the motion to mean much. "Then why?" he started. "They took what they wanted," she said, fragments spilling out again. "Work." Silence. "Church." He absorbed it, the words like stones landing in his chest. "You remember them?" he asked. "Faces?" "Boots," she said. "Quick, precise." "Clothes?" "Mostly," she whispered. He felt the old weight stir, a hollow ache of trying to save someone who had no one. He placed a hand gently on her back, keeping it still. "You don't have to say more right now," he said. She stayed pressed to him, quiet, still trembling. He glanced toward the horizon. No one came. The road remained empty. He breathed in the smell of dirt and ash, something burned faintly in the distance. "You're safe with me," he said softly, almost a promise. "I don't know what that means," she whispered. "Then you'll learn," he said. Her head shifted, tilting against his side. She let out a small, shaky breath. "I like it here," she said quietly. He nodded without moving, feeling the small pulse of trust and fear mingling together. The engine had long since passed. He realized he had stopped noticing the sounds around him. "All right," he said again. "I hear you." She squeezed his side once, small and firm. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting her warmth and fear anchor him in the present. She didn't move. He didn't either. A crow called again. The sun dipped lower behind the trees. Shadows stretched long across the dirt road, and still she pressed close. He didn't pull away. "Say it again," she whispered finally, hesitant. "Say what?" he asked. "The word," she murmured, voice so quiet it was almost lost in the wind. "I can't," he said. "Please," she breathed. He looked down at her small, desperate face, the eyes that mirrored something he thought he'd buried. "All right," he said. "I hear you." She pressed closer, forehead to his chest. Her hand brushed over the badge as if testing it, learning it was real. The road lay empty, dust drifting across the dirt. The sun dropped lower. He remained kneeling, letting her lean there, letting the word hang in the space between them, carrying more than either of them could yet name. She breathed out slowly. He breathed too. A crow called one last time before silence settled, heavy and still. Footsteps crunched along the dirt, careful and slow at first, then heavier. A voice called out, sharp, off-screen. "You got a problem?" The girl stiffened instantly, ducking behind him, small shoulders pressing to his back. "Don't give me to him," she whispered, nails digging into his coat. He stayed still, letting the moment stretch. The other ranger's voice came again, casual but probing. "She yours?" "No," he said without hesitation. "Then move aside." "No," he shot back, firm. The girl pressed closer, burying her face into his back, and he felt her tremble. The badge on his chest glinted in the fading light, a small, cold symbol between authority and protection. He could feel the tension in the other man's pause, the long stare that measured him, questioned him, tried to find a weakness. She's coming with me, he said finally, voice flat, no explanation, no argument. The other ranger studied him longer than comfortable, steps shifting, a low whistle in his throat. Then he turned and walked away, boots kicking up dust, leaving only silence behind. The girl peeked from behind him, eyes wide. Did he mean to hurt us? She asked, voice shaky. No, he said. He straightened slowly, hands brushing dirt from his pants, trying to hide the tremor he didn't know was there. They moved down the road, the girl still pressed close, her small hand brushing his side every few steps. He felt the weight of her trust like a stone, heavy and fragile. His own hands tingled, shaking slightly. He clenched them once, then let them hang. The sky was fading, light turning cold. Shadows stretched across the road, long and thin. He didn't know when the fear in his chest had replaced caution with something else. Her breathing was quiet now, soft against his back, and he realized she wasn't hiding out of fear of him anymore. She was hiding out of the world, the one that had taken everything from her. He glanced down at her, the dirt and grime on her hands and face, the thinness of her frame, and a knot of something long buried twisted in his chest. You okay? He asked. She nodded, barely. We keep moving, he said, more to himself than her. Where to? She whispered. Away, he replied. Her fingers brushed his coat again. Don't leave me. I won't. He noticed the trembling in his own hands now, subtle but real. They kept walking, side by side, footsteps slow at first, then gaining rhythm. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying dust and the faint smell of smoke from somewhere nearby. He glanced at her again. You trust me? I have to, she said softly. That word, the weight in her small voice, pressed on him more than any order or badge ever had. His chest felt tight. They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sound the crunch of dirt under boots and the occasional gust of wind. He felt the gaze of the world pressing at them, unseen but real. I'm not leaving, he said again. She let out a breath, small, trembling, and pressed her head into his side. He felt the badge, heavy and cold, press against her cheek as if anchoring them both. He realized then how much power it held, not the law, not the authority, but the promise it could be. Protection or threat, depending on who held it. They rounded a bend in the road. He could feel his hands trembling more now, unnoticed until this moment. The girl didn't seem to care, still pressed to him, still trusting him with a word he hadn't said aloud. He let the silence stretch, let the weight of it settle between them. Somewhere, a crow called, distant and sharp. He didn't flinch. He didn't move his hands away from his sides. He let her stay pressed into him, tiny and fragile, and let the badge between them mean what it must. The wind shifted, carrying dust and a faint tang of iron, and he realized the tremor in his hands wasn't from fear. It was something else, something older that had been waiting. He breathed slowly, letting her presence anchor him. The road ahead was empty. The world was quiet but heavy. He stayed still, feeling the girl's small weight against his back, feeling the badge cold and real, knowing the choice had already been made between them. They kept walking, one step after another, shadows stretching and bending, and still he didn't notice when the tremor finally stopped. They walked without speaking at first, the dirt road stretching ahead, trees brushing the edges of sight, wind stirring dry leaves. Her steps were quick, uneven, catching on stones, and she talked over them before he could stop her. You don't yell, she said. I can, he replied, voice low, calm. But you don't. She glanced at him briefly, then down at her feet, then back, words tumbling faster than the pace of their steps. Why's that? You ever have to? Sometimes, he said. She didn't respond, only studied his face, sharp and intense, as if trying to see through the lines he'd drawn around himself. What's that scar? She asked suddenly, pointing to the pale line along his forearm. He didn't answer, kept walking, shoulders tight. You gonna tell me or what? She pressed. He shook his head slightly. She tripped over a root, stumbled forward. He caught her instantly, arms around her small frame. She pressed into him, breathing uneven. Papa, I didn't mean to run, she whispered, voice breaking. He held her tighter for a moment, feeling the heat and fear in her chest. Don't call me that, he said finally, voice low, careful. She nodded, not looking up, tears running freely down her dirt-smeared cheeks. She stayed pressed against him, shaking, quiet sobs rattling out. He didn't pull away. Her hands gripped his coat sleeve, fingers clutching fabric as if it could keep the world from reaching her. I thought you'd leave me, she said softly. I'm here, he answered, almost a promise. They walked on, slow now, the tension in her small body easing against his side. She leaned her head lightly into him, trusting him even with the name he had denied. The wind brushed their faces, carrying the faint scent of smoke from somewhere distant, and he realized how raw and fragile the moment was. He felt a pressure in his chest, heavy with something he hadn't named in years, and he let it stay, didn't move. You won't? She asked quietly. No, he said. Silence fell for a moment, punctuated only by the crunch of boots on dirt and the faint rustle of leaves. Do you know what it's like? She asked. To run and have no one? He didn't answer immediately. He only kept walking, steady, measured, the pace slowing as if to match her fragile rhythm. I don't, he said at last. I do now, she whispered. He glanced down at her small, dirty face, the tears still wet, her eyes searching. We keep moving, he said softly, voice low, even. She nodded. The shadows of trees stretched across the road, long and thin, the sun lowering, spilling gold across the dirt. She pressed her hand briefly against his side, a small, fleeting connection, and he felt the tremor return to his hands, subtle and unrelenting. You gonna tell me your name? She asked suddenly. Not yet, he said. She hummed softly, not pushing, not arguing. She let herself walk closer, small steps, careful not to trip. He felt the weight of her trust, heavy and fragile, pressing against his ribs. Papa, she whispered once, testing. He stiffened but didn't respond, letting the word hang between them, neither accepting nor denying it. She breathed in sharply, eyes wide, then pressed her head against his chest again. He felt the weight, felt the pull of old memory, the ache he had buried deep inside. The wind shifted again, dust rising at their boots. He could hear the distant hum of a truck, far off and slow, but it didn't reach them. I thought you'd go, she murmured. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Her small hand slid along his side, brushing against the badge pinned to his chest. She hesitated, then held it lightly, testing it. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides, letting her presence, her trust, anchor him to this moment. Shadows lengthened. The sun dipped lower. Her breathing slowed slightly, a quiet rhythm pressing against him. He felt the tremor in his own hands fade, replaced by something heavier, something that would stay with him long after this road ended. Say it again, she whispered finally. Say what? He asked. The word, she said, voice small, hesitant, almost afraid of breaking it. He swallowed. The ache in his chest twisted tight, memory clawing at the edges of thought. Not yet, he said. She pressed her forehead lightly into his side, trusting him anyway. All right, he said finally, voice quiet, deliberate. I hear you. She let herself lean fully, small and fragile, weight pressing gently into him. The road ahead stretched long, empty. Dust rose and fell in slow spirals around their boots. Shadows shifted with the lowering sun. He breathed in, steady. She breathed out, a small, shaky sound. He didn't pull away. She didn't move. The word hung in the air between them, fragile but real. He let it stay there, a promise unspoken, heavy and true. The wind whispered through the trees again, carrying the faint tang of iron and dust, settling over them as they moved slowly, side by side, into the lengthening shadow of the road, letting silence speak where words could not. The house waited like it had been holding its breath for years. He pushed the door open, hinges whining, dust motes drifting in the slanting light. She stepped inside, small and hesitant, eyes darting over the empty rooms, the peeling wallpaper, the furniture draped in sheets. Why no locks? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged, brushing past her, boots scuffing the floor. Never needed them. You will, she said sharply, head tilted, suspicion cutting through her fear. He didn't answer, only led her further in, past the kitchen where an old stove sat cold and gray, past the fireplace filled with dry ashes. She ran her fingers over a dusty table, then froze at a pile of letters stacked neatly in a corner. One caught her eye, edges frayed, the ink smeared. She picked it up, fingers trembling. A name scratched out. She looked at him, voice small. "Who's this?" He didn't answer. She glanced around the room, eyes lingering on the faded photographs, the long shadows cast by the slats in the blinds. "Why didn't you answer?" she asked. He shook his head slightly, letting the silence speak. Night fell slowly, dark spilling over the corners of the house, stretching shadows long and thin. She didn't move to bed, didn't even sit. She stayed where she could see him, small figure pressed to the doorway of the living room. "Did they take your kid too?" she asked, voice cracking, barely audible. He didn't answer. That silence said more than words ever could. She slumped against the wall, knees pulled close, shivering slightly. He sat down on the floor beside her, leaning against the wall, hands resting on his knees, not speaking. The room smelled of dust and old wood, faint smoke from the hearth, and something unnameable, like memory trapped in walls. She shifted, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know," he said softly. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, twisting fabric in small, nervous motions. "Will they come?" "Not tonight," he said. She drew a shaky breath, nodding once, eyes squeezed shut. The letters remained untouched on the table, the name still scratched out, the past pressing in quietly. "You always stay awake?" she asked. "Sometimes," he replied. "Why?" "To make sure the world's still there," he said, voice low, careful. She swallowed, small nod. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. He didn't answer, only let his presence settle beside her, steady and unyielding. The wind rattled the window panes, faint taps like fingers running over glass, but the house stayed still. Outside, the trees creaked, leaves brushing against each other, whispers in the night. She shifted closer, pressing against his side, and he felt her small, fragile weight anchor him to the present. The moonlight cut through a crack in the blinds, painting the floor in pale stripes. She followed them with her eyes, tracing the pattern, quiet. "Do you sleep like this?" she asked. "No," he said. "Then why stay awake?" "To hear," he replied simply. Her fingers twined with his sleeve, pressing lightly, seeking reassurance. "I like it here," she murmured, voice almost lost in the darkness. He exhaled slowly, keeping still, letting her lean there, letting the silence stretch long and heavy between them. Dust drifted through the slats, catching the light. Shadows deepened. She shifted, resting her head against his arm, breathing slowing. He felt a tightness in his chest, a knot uncoiling slowly, remembering things he had thought buried. "I won't let them take you," he said quietly, more to himself than her. She didn't answer, only breathed in sync with him, small and tentative. The letters, the scratched-out names, the rooms holding years of quiet, all of it waited around them, holding secrets they didn't need to name tonight. He stayed on the floor beside her bed, awake, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the night breathing, the wind brushing softly against walls. She shifted, trying to make herself comfortable, small body pressing closer, seeking warmth and safety. He felt the ache of responsibility in his chest, heavy, real, grounding him to the floor, to the room, to her. The night stretched long, shadows pooling in corners, and still he didn't move. She slept lightly, eyes half closed, trusting him without a word, and he remained awake, keeping watch, letting her presence remind him that some things were worth standing for, even in silence. Dust settled on the floorboards. The letters remained, the past unsaid, the house breathing around them. He stayed on the floor, side by side with her, letting her lean, letting the night pass, awake, guarding the quiet they had found together. The knock came early, sharp against the wooden door. He froze, hand hovering near his hip. She pressed against his side, small and tense. "Two men," he whispered. "Clean boots, soft voices," she added, almost to herself. He glanced down at her. "Stay behind me." She nodded, gripping his coat. The door creaked as he opened it just enough to see two figures framed by morning light, dust swirling at their feet. "She's not registered," one said, voice even, smooth, almost polite. "She's not property," the other added, softer, but heavy. The girl flattened herself against the wall behind him, peeking out just enough to see, wide-eyed and silent. "She's with me," he said, voice calm but firm. "You know who runs this county," one of them said, almost a warning, words heavy with unspoken threat. He didn't flinch. "Not today," he replied. Their eyes met, brief and hard, measuring, weighing. Then the first exhaled sharply and nodded. "We'll see," he said, turning, boots crunching the gravel as they left. The engine of a truck rumbled faintly in the distance. The girl exhaled slowly, hands pressed together, trembling slightly. "Did I do bad?" she asked, voice small, barely audible. He knelt to her level, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "No. You did right," he said, eyes steady. She let out a soft breath, shoulders easing. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying a faint tang of dust and metal. She looked up at him, small and fragile, searching his face. He didn't answer, only stayed kneeling, letting her see the calm in his eyes. "They won't come back?" she asked quietly. "Not today," he repeated. She nodded once, pressing her hands to her chest, taking it in. The distant engine faded, slower this time, as if respecting the space they had carved out. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his pants, scanning the horizon. She followed, small steps, careful. "Do you think they'll know?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not." She shivered slightly, not from cold, from something else. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Come on," he said, voice low. They stepped into the morning light, moving toward the road ahead, their shadows stretching long and thin. She kept close, tiny fingers brushing his side, anchoring herself to him. He felt the weight, heavy but grounding, of her trust and fear mingled together. The road ahead was quiet, empty, carrying only the faint sound of wind through the trees and the distant hum of engines fading into the distance. They walked, slow and steady, together, each step measured, carrying the echo of the warning behind them and the fragile sense of safety between them. The sunlight touched the edges of their forms, long and angled, casting shadows that reached for the trees beyond. She glanced up at him once, eyes wide. "You're not gonna leave me?" she asked, voice soft. "Not today," he said, and she let out a small, relieved breath. They moved on, the road curling before them, dust rising with each step. He kept watch, alert, hands brushing against his belt, eyes scanning. She stayed close, head occasionally brushing his side, trusting him in a way that made the weight of responsibility press down heavier in his chest. The morning stretched, quiet but tense, filled with unspoken words and lingering threats. The distant engine returned slowly, careful, muted. He noticed it this time, not flinching, hand resting on his coat as they continued down the road, side by side, shadows and dust wrapping around them, carrying the fragile promise of a day survived. She spoke in fragments, small bursts of memory that spilled out like loose stones. They said work. They said church. They said quiet. Each phrase came fast, jagged, almost like she feared being interrupted. He listened, silent, connecting names to places, faces to boots, the faint shapes of routines built to trap children. His jaw tightened as he pieced together the patterns she couldn't yet see in full. "You remember faces?" he asked carefully. "I remember boots," she said, quick, precise, eyes flicking to his chest, then away. He nodded slowly, letting the small answer hang between them. "Clothes?" he asked. She shook her head. "Mostly," she whispered. Her small hands twitched as she folded them in her lap, fingers twisting together, knuckles white. He swallowed. "And, did they?" Her eyes went wide. She flinched slightly at his question. He didn't push. Instead, he let the silence stretch, heavy and dense, wrapping around them. He shifted, brushing dust off his pants, feeling the weight of years in the quiet. Finally, he spoke, voice low, tentative, almost a confession to the empty room. "I had a child once." The words hung fragile in the air. She didn't answer immediately, just studied him, small eyes tracing the line of his jaw, the worn edges of his hands, the faint tremors still lingering from tension and fear. He glanced down at her, thin and fragile, yet somehow full of a courage that scared him more than any gun or badge ever had. "Just once," he said, clarifying, as if the detail mattered. She shifted closer, leaning lightly against him, small shoulder brushing his side. Silence returned, heavy but not empty, the kind that carried both loss and a quiet promise. He reached for her hand, small and shaking, and let her grip his fingers, a silent exchange of trust. The room smelled faintly of dust and old wood, of smoke that lingered in corners, of memories trapped in the walls. She spoke again, voice small, almost confessional. "They said I couldn't say anything. I had to stay quiet." He nodded, listening. "But you spoke." "A little," she admitted. "Enough to remember." "Good," he said softly. His hand stayed on hers, holding her in place without pressing, anchoring them both. Shadows stretched long from the slats in the blinds, making the room feel narrower, yet intimate. He felt a tug in his chest, a hollow ache he had carried for years, resurfacing in her tiny frame, in her hesitant voice. "I won't let them take you," he said finally, quietly, almost a vow. She exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing a fraction, small hands twisting his sleeve in silent affirmation. They sat together, breathing in sync, sharing the weight of the memories, the fragments of a past neither could fully reclaim. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, leaves brushing each other softly, a subtle reminder of a world moving forward while they stayed in the moment. Her eyes, wide and cautious, met his. "You mean that?" she asked, voice small. "Every word," he replied. She pressed her head to his chest, drawing strength from him, letting herself rest in the security he offered. He didn't move. He let her lean, let the quiet hold them together. Every heartbeat echoed in the room, carrying more meaning than words could manage. The letters in the corner, the names scratched out, the shadows on the floor, all of it waited patiently, ignored for now, letting this fragile understanding take root. Her breathing slowed, and he felt the hollow ache soften, replaced by the weight of promise, fragile but firm. He stayed, silent, listening to her inhale and exhale, letting the fragments of her past and his own loss weave together in a quiet, almost sacred space. She shifted slightly, pressing closer. I think I like you," she whispered. He didn't respond immediately. He let the words linger, heavy in the room. "I know," he said finally, voice soft. The air remained still, only the faint creak of the house marking the passage of time. Outside, a crow called, distant, sharp, cutting through the quiet. He listened, letting the sound settle over them, wrapping the room in a fragile sense of calm. She pressed her small hand into his, a silent question, a silent trust. He didn't pull away. He let her anchor herself to him, let the moment stretch, heavy and intimate. The past would wait, the world outside could wait. For now, they existed in the room together, in silence filled with understanding, grief, and the first fragile hints of hope. He breathed slowly, deliberately, letting her presence ground him, the weight of her small body leaning into his side reminding him that some things, some people, were worth holding on to no matter how fragile or broken the world became. The room stayed quiet, heavy with memory, with trust, with a promise unspoken but felt. He stayed beside her, awake, letting her settle, letting the fragments of what had been lost and what might be found coexist in the muted light of the room. Night pressed in around them, thick and black, the kind of darkness that felt alive. He crouched low, boots silent on the cold dirt, her small hand gripping his sleeve tightly. "Stay close," he whispered. "I always do," she replied, barely moving, eyes wide in the dim moonlight. Ahead, a building leaned against itself, shadows pooling under the eaves. Windows dark, doors barred with the faint smell of old paint and rot. He moved forward, careful, listening. She followed, small and cautious, steps almost ghost-like. Inside, records lay scattered across tables, names inked in neat rows, files stacked in haphazard piles. The scent of paper mixed with dust and decay. "Take what you need," he murmured, scanning quickly, eyes sharp. She knelt, small hands sifting through the papers, pulling out names and dates, a trembling collection of stolen lives. Then a spark caught the corner of a file, orange licking the edge. The smell of smoke hit him before he saw the fire, small at first, then greedy, crawling along the wood and papers. Men shouted from outside, voices rough and urgent, boots pounding the dirt floor. She froze, wide-eyed. "Move," he hissed. He lifted her up, small and light, holding her against his chest. She wrapped her arms around him instinctively, face pressed to his shoulder, breath quick and shallow. The flames reflected in his badge, orange and alive, shadows dancing across the wall and their faces. Smoke clawed at their throats, filling the air with heat and tension. He ran, carrying her out through the back, over broken boards, under low-hanging beams. She screamed once, sharp and startled, then stopped herself, clenching his coat as they stumbled into the night air. Outside, the night was cooler, stars hidden behind clouds, wind carrying the faint smell of burning. He set her down briefly behind a low wall, hands brushing soot from her hair and face. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, urgent. She nodded once, wide-eyed, chest heaving. He grabbed a stack of remaining files, tossing them into the fire as he ran back inside, grabbing what he could before the flames consumed everything. Men yelled, commands sharp, impossible to hear over the crackling and snapping wood. He didn't stop, didn't hesitate, each movement precise, calculated, fueled by anger and the need to protect. She watched, small and tense, hands gripping the edge of the wall. He returned to her, face streaked with soot and sweat, eyes hard but alive. "We go," he said. She nodded, gripping him tightly as he hoisted her up again, legs wrapped around him instinctively. They ran into the night, boots kicking up dirt, firelight reflected in their eyes. The building behind them burned unchecked, shadows leaping, papers curling, names vanishing into smoke. He didn't look back more than a glance, only enough to mark the danger and confirm it was burning. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, silent, trembling. "I won't let them get you," he said, low and steady, almost a promise. The flames reflected again in his badge, flickering, alive, a small symbol of protection and defiance. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke and earth, tangling with the night air. They moved faster, silent except for the rush of their breath, the thud of boots against dirt, heartbeats echoing in sync. Somewhere distant, a siren wailed, muted, carrying through the trees. She pressed herself closer, gripping him, tiny and trembling but steady. He felt her weight, the fragility of her trust, the enormity of what he was doing, and he didn't falter. The night wrapped around them, full of shadows, firelight, and distant danger. He kept moving, carrying her through the darkness, letting the flames burn behind them, letting the world beyond the fire fall away. She clung to him, breathing in time with his own, the only certainty in a night filled with chaos. His badge caught the light one last time before they disappeared into the deeper shadows, a cold, solid promise reflecting fire and protection. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They moved together, one step after another, away from the burning building, away from the men, into the haunted quiet of the night. He held her, small and trembling, and let the weight of responsibility anchor him, carrying them both into the uncertain dark. They crouched beside the old well, shadows stretching long and thin across the ground. Sirens wailed somewhere far off, muffled by trees and distance. She trembled against him, small hands gripping his coat sleeve, fingers tight around the fabric. "Say it's okay," she whispered, voice small, fragile. He shifted slightly, letting her press against him, feeling her weight settle into his side. The badge on his chest caught the faint moonlight, dull and heavy, a silent symbol of protection. "I got you," he said finally, steady, soft. The words lingered, careful, deliberate, carrying the weight she had demanded. She exhaled, releasing some of the tension coiled through her small body. "You staying?" she asked, voice hesitant but searching. "Yes," he replied. She let her forehead press against his chest, close enough to feel the steady beat of his heart, grounding her in the moment. "Papa," she whispered again, this time steady, confident in a way that made the word carry more than fear or mistake. He didn't correct her. He let it sit between them, solid and unshakable. Around them, the night was quiet, only the wind rustling through the trees, carrying dust and faint traces of distant engines. He reached down and loosened his belt, unfastening his badge carefully. "What are you doing?" she asked softly, looking up at him with wide, cautious eyes. "Burying it," he said. "Why?" "It doesn't protect anyone anymore." "Not like I thought it would." She stayed pressed against him, head tilted, small fingers brushing his coat. "You sure?" she asked. "I'm sure," he replied. The ground was cold, hard beneath them. He dug a shallow hole near the well, careful, deliberate. She watched, silent, tense, fingers curling into the dirt at the edge of the hole, mimicking his motions. When he finally laid the badge in the earth, she reached out, touching it lightly, almost reverently. He patted the soil over it, hands firm but gentle, burying more than metal. He looked down at her, small face upturned, eyes reflecting a mixture of trust and fear. "It's done," he said. She let out a small breath, relief threading through her frame, small shoulders easing slightly. "We're okay now?" she asked. "For now," he said. She pressed her forehead to his chest again, lingering, trusting, leaning fully into the promise he had just spoken aloud. The night remained still, holding them in quiet, heavy with the unspoken, the things left behind, and the fragile hope they carried forward together. "You feel it?" she asked softly. "What?" "Safe," she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He let her feel the moment, the anchor of being together, small and quiet, heavy with understanding. "Yeah," he said at last. She exhaled, small tremors leaving her body, trusting him completely in the stillness. The distant sirens faded, swallowed by the trees, leaving only wind and quiet rustle of leaves. He wrapped an arm around her, steady, unyielding, and she leaned in, small and exhausted, finally letting herself breathe. The world beyond the well, beyond the dark trees, beyond the danger, could wait. Here, beside him, she was safe. He stayed still, holding her, letting the night close around them, solid and quiet, carrying the weight of the promise he had finally said aloud. Shadows deepened, stars hidden behind clouds. Her breathing matched his now, slow, careful, grounded. He let her stay pressed to him, small hands gripping his coat, head resting on his chest. The badge lay buried near the old well, and with it, the fragile symbol of authority, fear, and protection. Here, in the quiet night, it didn't matter. Only that they were together, holding on to each other, breathing, surviving, carrying the promise and the words she spoke freely now. "Papa," she said again, steady. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He simply held her, letting the words settle like a stone, solid and permanent, in the space between them. The night stretched long, calm, filled only with the quiet of two souls anchoring each other against a world that had tried to take everything. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight in his chest soften, the ache of the past mixing with the fragile hope of the present. She stayed pressed to him, finally still, finally trusting, finally at home in the quiet promise of his presence. Morning arrived pale and quiet, spilling weak light across the worn boards of the house. Voices carried faintly through the airwaves, static and urgency weaving together as names and deeds traveled faster than any man could move. He listened from the doorway, eyes scanning the empty yard, the world pressing in without ceremony. Doors clicked shut along the street, neighbors whispering, the county waking to truths exposed overnight. The girl watched him, small and tense, eyes wide, fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. "You scared?" she asked softly. "Yes," he admitted, voice low, careful. "Me too," she replied. She shifted closer, brushing against his side, seeking comfort, seeking steady ground in the uncertain morning. They moved through the house quietly, boots light on the wooden floors, each step measured, aware. Outside, the sunlight pooled in pale rectangles through the blinds, dust dancing in the streaks. The wind pushed softly, carrying scents of dry earth and distant smoke. They stepped onto the dirt road, shoulders brushing. No words passed, only the sound of boots scuffing against earth, of breathing, of quiet togetherness. He glanced once toward the house behind them, silent, empty, secrets and histories folded into the walls. The girl stayed close, hands brushing his side, leaning slightly against him. The radio crackled faintly somewhere, voices reporting names, exposures, consequences settling like dust over the county. They walked, slow and steady, leaving the house and its weight behind. Each step carried the fragile promise of a day survived, a threat escaped, a quiet justice enacted. Trees lined the edges of the road, shadows long but soft in the morning light. The girl tilted her head toward him, small and thoughtful. "Are we done?" she asked. "Not entirely," he said, voice low. "But we've started." She nodded once, pressing closer. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We'll keep moving," he said. She exhaled, tiny relief slipping from her small shoulders. The horizon stretched ahead, pale and empty, offering both space and uncertainty. they didn't look back at the house. Its windows, doors, and dusty walls faded behind them, leaving only the memory of nights spent awake, promises spoken, and fears confronted. Step by step, they moved through the morning, carrying each other forward. He felt the weight of responsibility anchor him, steady, tangible, a counterbalance to the fragility of her small hands gripping his sleeve. Sunlight warmed their backs lightly, shadows stretching long across the dirt, marking the passage of time without announcement. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked quietly, voice hesitant. "Some might," he replied. "But not today." She let the words settle, leaning slightly into him, trusting the rhythm of his breathing. The road stretched on, empty except for them, carrying the quiet of victory, the muted satisfaction of wrongs exposed, and the fragile hope of a day survived together. Trees whispered above, leaves brushing lightly, a subtle soundtrack to their slow progress. He kept his eyes ahead, scanning the road, every sense alert, yet steady. She stayed close, head tilted toward him, body small and careful, anchoring herself to his presence. The house faded further behind them, past and memory converging into quiet resolve. Step after step, they moved into the tree line, the edges of the frontier softening in morning light. Neither spoke. The weight of the night in the house lingered, but it was contained, folded neatly behind them. Only the road ahead mattered, pale, empty, waiting. They passed through dust and shade, leaving shadows behind, moving together in silence, steady, deliberate, anchored to each other. He felt her small hand press against his side briefly, almost a question, almost a reassurance. He didn't speak. He only let her presence ground him, holding her steady beside him. The light shifted as they approached the edge of the tree line, softening, welcoming, a quiet promise of distance from danger and exposure. They didn't turn. The house, the men, the world beyond the road all remained behind them, small and insignificant in comparison to the fragile trust they carried forward. Step by step, they disappeared into the trees, shoulders brushing, bodies leaning slightly together, leaving only the road behind, silent but witness to the beginning of something fragile, something earned, something wholly theirs. They stopped at the creek, water low and slow, glinting pale in the morning light. She knelt first, small hands dipping into the cold flow, washing dirt and ash from her skin. He stayed a step behind, watching, letting her have the moment, letting her feel the world still moving, still present, still soft around them. "You still quiet?" she asked, eyes lifted, curious, tentative. "I listen better now," he said, voice low, steady, carrying the weight of all they'd endured. She dipped her hands again, water dripping from fingers, droplets catching in the sunlight like tiny sparks. She rose slowly, brushing the damp strands of hair from her face. Without hesitation, she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. Fingers entwined, small hand warm in his, a tether solid and real. She looked up at him, small and confident now, a spark of trust and recognition in her eyes. "Papa," she said, simple, final, unafraid. He squeezed her hand once, letting the words settle fully, carrying the promise and weight it had earned. "I'm here," he answered, clear and certain, voice carrying across the quiet creek and the rustle of nearby trees. She pressed her forehead lightly to his chest, small and safe, breathing slow and even. The water lapped quietly at the banks, steady, persistent, a rhythm that matched their own slow, deliberate movements. They stayed like that for a long moment, hand in hand, silent but complete, anchored to each other by choice, by trust, by the promises they had kept and spoken. Around them, the world moved on, distant and muted, carrying the past behind, leaving only the present, fragile and luminous, stretched between them. Step by step, they left the creek, water dripping from clothes and hair, walking slowly through the morning light, shoulders brushing, small hands still entwined. No words were necessary. Every glance, every step, every touch carried understanding, acknowledgement, and care. He kept his eyes forward, alert, steady, aware of the world and the fragile trust beside him. She stayed close, moving with him, breathing in sync, grounded in his presence. Trees lined the path, light filtering through leaves, shadows stretching long and soft across the dirt. The air smelled faintly of earth and water, carrying the promise of days ahead, open and unclaimed. They stopped once at the edge of the path, looking out over the rolling field beyond, horizon pale, stretching wide and empty. He squeezed her hand again. She looked up at him, small and confident, eyes steady. "We stay?" she asked softly. "We stay," he said. And they did. No running, no hiding. Just staying, anchored to each other, choosing presence over fear, trust over uncertainty. Step by step, hand in hand, they moved slowly into the light, together, leaving shadows and past behind, carrying only what they had earned, the quiet, hard-won promise of being there for one another, fully, finally. The wind brushed through the trees, soft and warm. The creek murmured behind them. And in that quiet, in that steady rhythm of steps and breathing, the story ended, not with escape, not with applause, but with the enduring, earned presence of two souls choosing each other and choosing home.